It was supposed to be a perfect day. A warm breeze rustled through the towering oak trees, their leaves whispering like old friends sharing secrets. Laughter echoed in the distance, the carefree giggles of children, the rhythmic creak of a swing, the soft thud of a ball bouncing against the pavement. Ethan Walker stood at the entrance of the park, holding his 5-year-old daughter's tiny hand. Dressed in a tailored navy blazer, with an understated yet unmistakably expensive wristwatch peeking from under his cuff, he was the picture of success, a self-made billionaire, a man who had built an empire from the ground up, a visionary in the world of real estate development. But today, none of that mattered. His confident stride faltered as his eyes swept across the playground, the same one he had played in as a child. His father had brought him here every weekend, lifting him onto the swings, teaching him how to throw a baseball. This place had once been full of life, a sanctuary of innocence and laughter, but now it was something else entirely. The slides were rusted, the benches were cracked, graffiti covered the play structures like battle scars. Instead of families, the park was littered with people slumped against trees, their hollow eyes staring into nothingness. His stomach tightened. He had been gone too long. 30 years had passed since he had last stepped foot in this park, and in that time, he had gone from a struggling kid in a working-class neighborhood to one of the wealthiest men in the country. His world was now one of luxury penthouses, boardrooms, and exclusive events. But standing here, he felt an unexpected weight pressing on his chest. He didn't recognize the place where his childhood had lived. "Come on, Daddy!" His daughter's voice broke through his thoughts. Her blonde curls bounced as she tugged at his arm. She was too young to notice the decay, too innocent to sense the darkness hiding in the corners. He forced a smile. "All right, sweetheart, let's play." Then it happened. From the far end of the park, a disheveled man stumbled forward, his clothes tattered, his face sunken, his body frail. His eyes, wild and unfocused, landed on Ethan. And then, in a raspy voice, he shouted a single word, a word that sliced through Ethan like a blade. His breath caught. His grip on his daughter's hand tightened, because that one word changed everything. Ethan Walker was a man used to control. In business, he dictated the terms. He made things happen. He had built his billion-dollar empire by seeing opportunities where others saw obstacles, by outthinking and outmaneuvering anyone who stood in his way. But standing in that park, hearing that one word screamed at him by a disheveled man, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: shock, disbelief, a creeping sense of familiarity. The man who had shouted at him was hunched over, his clothes stained and torn, his shoes barely holding together. His eyes were bloodshot, his face gaunt, and his unkempt beard was streaked with dirt. But there was something about him, something that pulled at a memory buried deep in Ethan's past. "Daddy?" A small voice brought him back to the present. Ethan blinked and looked down at his daughter, Lily, her bright blue eyes filled with confusion. "Who is that man?" she asked. Ethan exhaled slowly, forcing a smile. "Just someone who... You walk past me like I don't exist." The beggar's voice cracked as he staggered forward. "Ethan, it's you, isn't it?" Lily clung to her father's leg, sensing the tension. Ethan's mind raced. How did this man know his name? Who was he? His security instincts kicked in. He glanced around, scanning the park for potential threats. The years of high-stakes business deals had taught him that danger often came disguised as the unexpected. "Sir, do I know you?" Ethan asked cautiously, his tone calm but firm. The man let out a bitter laugh, his body swaying slightly. "Oh, you don't remember me?" He wiped his face with a trembling hand. "Figures. A guy like you, high and mighty, why would you remember?" Lily pressed closer to Ethan, gripping his hand. "Daddy, I want to go home." Ethan nodded slowly. "All right, sweetheart." As he turned to leave, the beggar's voice pierced through him once more. "Your father would be ashamed of you." Ethan froze. The words hit him harder than any business failure, harder than any scandal, harder than anything he had faced in his entire career. Slowly, he turned back around. The beggar was staring at him now, eyes wild, full of something, anger, pain, recognition. "What did you say?" Ethan asked, his voice quieter now. The man took a step closer. "You heard me." Ethan's pulse quickened. His father, his childhood, memories of a different life, a different version of himself, flickered in the back of his mind. He hadn't thought about this park in years, and now here stood a ghost from a past he had long since buried. Lily tugged on his hand again. "Daddy." Ethan swallowed hard, suddenly aware of the weight of his daughter's presence. He had spent years keeping his personal and professional lives separate, but now something from his past had found him, right here, in front of the one person he wanted to protect the most. He turned back to the beggar. "Who are you?" The man let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "You really don't know." He gestured around the park. "This place, it used to be ours, Ethan. We owned this playground. This was our kingdom, man." Ethan felt his chest tighten. A long-forgotten voice whispered in his mind. "You and me, Ethan, best friends forever." His breath caught, his stomach twisted. No, it couldn't be. "Jason." Ethan's voice was barely above a whisper. The beggar's lips curled into a faint, broken smile. "There he is. You do remember." Ethan's throat went dry. He hadn't seen Jason in 30 years. His childhood best friend, the kid who had been his shadow, his partner in crime on every adventure, the boy he swore he'd never leave behind. And now, Jason stood before him, barely recognizable, a shell of the boy he used to be. Ethan's heart pounded. He had spent his entire life moving forward, building something greater, proving that he would never be poor again. And yet, here was Jason, a living reminder of the life he had escaped. "Jason?" he exhaled, shaking his head. "What happened to you?" Jason let out a bitter laugh. "What happened to me?" His voice was hoarse, but laced with sarcasm. "I could ask you the same thing, Ethan. You disappeared. You left this place, left all of us. And now you come back, strolling in here like a king, like you don't even know what this place has become." Ethan had no words. Jason shook his head. "You got rich, huh? Big-time billionaire. Congratulations." He spat on the ground. "Meanwhile, some of us didn't get so lucky." Ethan didn't move. He had dealt with ruthless CEOs, boardroom betrayals, economic crashes, but this was something he wasn't prepared for. Lily, still clinging to his hand, whispered, "Daddy, I don't like this man." Ethan took a deep breath and looked Jason in the eye. "What do you want from me?" Jason's expression darkened. "I don't want your money." His voice was quiet but firm. "I just want to know, do you ever think about what you left behind?" Silence. Ethan swallowed hard. For the first time in years, he wasn't sure how to answer. Ethan Walker had faced ruthless competitors, courtroom battles, and billion-dollar deals teetering on the brink of collapse. But nothing had ever left him speechless like this. Jason, his best friend from childhood, the boy who had shared his dreams, his secrets, his fears, and now a broken man, standing in the ruins of the playground they once ruled. Ethan felt a deep, unfamiliar unease settle in his chest. He could see it in Jason's face, years of suffering, of struggle, of being forgotten. And for the first time in decades, Ethan felt something uncomfortable stirring inside him. Guilt. Lily shifted uncomfortably beside him, clutching his hand. "Daddy," she whispered. Ethan blinked, breaking eye contact with Jason. His daughter, his world, was standing in the middle of a moment he never wanted her to witness. "We should go," Ethan said, his voice measured. "This was a mistake." Jason let out a low, bitter laugh. "Yeah, run away like you always do." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Jason, this isn't the place. I have my daughter with me." Jason's expression flickered. A brief moment of recognition, maybe even shame, but it was gone just as fast. He glanced at Lily, then back at Ethan. "Must be nice," Jason muttered, voice hoarse. "Having a family, having a life." He scoffed. "I used to have dreams too, you know." Ethan exhaled sharply. "I didn't abandon you." Jason's eyes snapped to his. "Didn't you?" The words hit harder than Ethan expected. For years, he had justified everything he did, the late nights, the sacrifices, the people he had left behind, as necessary. He told himself that success demanded ruthlessness, that looking back only slowed him down. But now, standing here face to face with the past, he felt something he hadn't felt in decades. Doubt. Jason shook his head. "You want to know what happened to me?" His voice was raw now, no longer just bitter, but something deeper. "I lost everything. My dad got sick. My mum fell apart. I tried to keep it together, but life just kept hitting and hitting and hitting. Ethan remained silent. You were my best friend, Jason continued. I waited for you to come back, but you never did. Lily's small voice cut through the tension. Daddy, who is he? Ethan glanced down at his daughter. How could he explain this? That the man standing in front of them was once the closest thing he had to a brother. Ethan hesitated. He wasn't even sure what the right answer was. Jason let out another bitter chuckle. Don't worry, kid. Your dad doesn't owe me an explanation. His voice dropped lower. Not anymore. Ethan felt an unfamiliar pressure behind his ribs, a weight he hadn't felt in years. He had spent decades building wealth, building power, building a future for his daughter so she would never have to struggle the way he had. But what had he left behind in the process? Jason took a step back, his expression unreadable now. Forget it. Go back to your perfect life. Ethan hesitated. He could walk away right now, take Lily, get in his car, and never think about this moment again. That's what the Ethan Walker of the last 30 years would have done. But something about this moment felt different. He looked at Jason again, really looked at him. Beneath the grime, the exhaustion, the anger, he could still see the boy he once knew, the kid who used to race him on their bikes, the kid who had his back in every schoolyard fight, the kid who had once called him brother. Ethan inhaled sharply. He could walk away, or he could do something he hadn't done in years. He could make things right. Slowly, Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out his business card. Jason's expression hardened. I said I don't want your money. It's not about money, Ethan said, his voice steady. It's a way out. Jason stared at him. You think a piece of paper is going to fix my life? No, Ethan admitted, but it's a start. Jason didn't move. Ethan stepped closer, lowering his voice. You think I don't know how hard life can get? I do. I made it out, and I'm offering you the same chance. Jason's jaw clenched, his hands balled into fists. For a moment, Ethan thought he was going to throw the card on the ground. Then, slowly, Jason took it. Ethan exhaled. Daddy, Lily whispered again, can we go now? Ethan nodded. He turned back to Jason, eyes searching his old friend's face. You don't have to call, Ethan said quietly. But if you ever decide you want out of this, I meant what I said. It's a way out. Jason said nothing. Ethan hesitated a moment longer, then took Lily's hand and walked away. But as they left the park, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. Something had shifted, and for the first time in years, Ethan Walker felt something unfamiliar. Hope. Ethan Walker sat in the back seat of his sleek black SUV, staring out the window as the city blurred past. The weight of the encounter at the park lingered in his chest like an anchor. Lily was beside him, swinging her legs absent-mindedly, humming a tune from her favorite cartoon. She had already moved on. Her world was simple, full of love and safety. Ethan had made sure of that, but his world wasn't simple, not anymore. Jason, his childhood best friend, now reduced to a shell of the boy he once knew. The bitterness in his voice, the raw pain behind his words, it echoed in Ethan's mind like an unanswered question. Had he really abandoned Jason? Had he really left without looking back? Yes, he had. It wasn't intentional. It was survival. Ethan had always told himself that he had to move forward, had to become something more, had to escape the life that had nearly swallowed him whole. But Jason hadn't escaped. And now, he was stuck, trapped in the same cycle of pain and failure that Ethan had fought so hard to leave behind. Daddy! Lily's voice pulled him from his thoughts. He turned to her, forcing a small smile. Yes, sweetheart. She tilted her head, studying him the way only a child could. Are you sad? Ethan exhaled through his nose, glancing out the window again. No, baby. Just thinking. She paused, then said, That man was mean. Ethan hesitated. He has been through a lot. Lily frowned. Why didn't you just tell him to go away? Ethan's lips pressed together. How could he explain to a 5-year-old that sometimes people didn't need to be ignored? That sometimes the people who lashed out the most were the ones who needed help the most. I used to know him, Ethan finally said, a long time ago. Lily's eyes widened. Really? Yeah. He hesitated. We were best friends. She thought about that for a moment, then asked, What happened? Ethan sighed. Life. Lily wrinkled her nose, as if that wasn't a good enough answer. Are you still best friends? He looked at her, at the pure, innocent way she saw the world. In her mind, friendships lasted forever. In her world, there was no such thing as abandonment or lost time. I don't know, Ethan admitted. Lily didn't say anything else, just swung her legs and hummed again. But Ethan couldn't shake the thought. That night, Ethan sat in his home office and staring at his phone, the business card. Had Jason thrown it away? Had he even considered using it? Or had Ethan just made a fool of himself, trying to help a man who no longer wanted to be helped? He didn't know, and it bothered him. He pulled up a name on his phone, Mark Roberts, his head of security. The man answered on the first ring. Sir, I need a favor, Ethan said. Of course. Ethan hesitated. Was he really going to do this? But the image of Jason's hollow face flashed in his mind. I need information on someone, Ethan said. A man named Jason Carter. Find out where he's been, what happened to him. A brief pause. Understood. Ethan hung up and leaned back in his chair, rubbing his hands over his face. He was a billionaire. A man who could buy anything, solve any problem with a phone call. But this wasn't business, this was personal. And for the first time in years, Ethan wasn't sure if he knew how to fix it. Meanwhile, Jason Carter sat on the edge of a graffiti-covered bench, turning the small business card over in his fingers. Walker Enterprises. He scoffed. Ethan Walker, billionaire, CEO, the golden boy. And here Jason was, dirty, broken and addicted. A walking failure. He should throw the card away, but he didn't. Instead, he just stared at it, his mind racing. Could he even go back? Was there anything left of the person he used to be? Jason let out a breath, clenched his jaw, and made a decision. Tomorrow, he was going to call. Because for the first time in years, he wanted out. Ethan Walker was halfway through his morning routine when his phone buzzed. He had just finished his workout, a habit he refused to break no matter how packed his schedule was. Discipline had gotten him where he was. Every morning, same ritual, workout, coffee, emails. But today, something felt different. He grabbed the phone from the marble counter, his sharp eyes scanning the caller ID. Unknown number. His breath slowed. A part of him knew exactly who it was. He hesitated for a moment, then swiped to answer. This is Ethan. Silence. Then, a raspy, hesitant voice. It's Jason. Ethan exhaled. He had called. For a second, neither of them spoke. Didn't think you'd actually pick up. Then Jason let out a dry chuckle. Ethan glanced out the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse, the city stretching beneath him. Two men, two entirely different worlds, one call bridging 30 years. You called, Ethan said simply. Jason exhaled on the other end. Yeah, guess I did. More silence. Ethan leaned against the counter, choosing his words carefully. Are you ready to get out of this? Jason scoffed. You think it's that easy? No, Ethan admitted. I know it's not. Jason sniffed. Then why offer? Ethan rubbed his jaw, debating how honest he wanted to be. Then he decided, if they were doing this, they were doing it right. Because I owe you, Ethan said. I left. I never looked back. That's on me. Jason didn't say anything for a moment. Then, you really believe you owe me? Ethan thought about it, about their childhood, about the park, about Jason standing in the ruins of their past, looking like a ghost of the boy he once was. Yes, Ethan said. Jason exhaled heavily. I don't know if I can do this, man. You can, Ethan said firmly, but not alone. Jason let out a bitter laugh. And what? You're just gonna fix everything, snap your fingers and make me rich like you. Ethan's expression hardened. That's not how this works, Jason. Silence. Ethan continued. You don't need money. You need a fresh start. You need to get clean. And that's gonna be a fight. Jason swallowed audibly. Yeah, I know. Ethan didn't push. This had to be Jason's decision. After a moment, Jason cleared his throat. What exactly are you offering? Ethan leaned forward. Rehab. Real rehab. The best facilities. You commit to that, I'll give you a job when you're ready. Jason let out a slow breath. A job? Yes. A real one. Something that gives you a reason to wake up every morning. Something that proves you're not who you used to be. Jason was quiet again. Then, a quiet, broken laugh. You're serious, Jason muttered. "You actually believe I can turn this around?" Ethan's grip on the phone tightened. "I wouldn't be offering if I didn't." Another silence. Then Jason let out a sharp breath. "All right," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "I'll do it." Ethan closed his eyes for a brief second. Relief, hope, something he hadn't felt in years. "Good," Ethan said. "I'll send a car for you." Jason chuckled dryly. "Oh, so I get the VIP treatment now?" Ethan smirked. "Are you always like the fancy stuff?" Jason let out a short laugh. But this time there was something else in it, something lighter. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something real. Later that day, Jason stood outside a rundown motel, clutching a duffel bag that held everything he owned. He was about to step into a car that would take him to a place where he had no more excuses. His hands shook. Withdrawal was already creeping in. The urge to run was overwhelming. But then he thought about Ethan, about that damn park, about the promise of something better, and for the first time in years, he chose to fight. Jason stepped into the car. Ethan Walker sat in his office, staring at his phone screen. A single text message blinked back at him. "I'm here." Jason had arrived at the rehab facility. Ethan exhaled, setting the phone down. He had done his part. Now it was up to Jason. But he knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. His assistant, Rachel, stepped into the office. "Mr. Walker, your 2 p.m. meeting with the investors is in 5 minutes." Ethan barely looked up. "Reschedule it." Rachel hesitated. "Are you sure? They flew in from London just for this." "I said reschedule it." His tone left no room for argument. Rachel nodded quickly and left. Ethan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. For the first time in years, business wasn't his biggest priority. Jason was. Meanwhile, Jason sat on the edge of a bed in a pristine, private rehab facility. Everything about it felt foreign. Clean sheets, a room with no peeling paint or water damage, a meal waiting for him that wasn't stolen or bought with crumpled dollar bills. He clenched his fists, his body already starting to ache. The withdrawal was coming. He had done this before, tried to get clean, tried to get out, but this time was different. This time Ethan was watching, and for some reason that mattered. A nurse walked in, clipboard in hand. "Jason Carter." He nodded. She smiled gently. "Let's get started." Jason took a deep breath. Then, for the first time in years, he chose to fight. 2 weeks later, Ethan was in the middle of reviewing financial reports when his phone rang. Unknown number. He didn't hesitate this time. "Jason?" "Yeah." Jason's voice was hoarse. Tired. "It's me." Ethan leaned back in his chair, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "You made it 2 weeks." Jason let out a dry laugh. "Barely." Ethan could hear the exhaustion in his voice, the pain of detoxing, of facing his demons. But there was something else, too. Determination. "How do you feel?" Ethan asked. "Like hell." Ethan chuckled. "That means it's working." Jason scoffed. "Easy for you to say, Mr. Billionaire." Ethan smirked. "You know, you used to call me Big Shot when we were kids." Jason snorted. "Yeah, well, looks like I was right." Ethan's smile faded slightly. "You were." A beat of silence. Then Jason exhaled. "I just wanted to say, thanks." Ethan's chest tightened. Jason didn't say things like that easily. "You don't have to thank me," Ethan said. "Just keep going." Jason's voice was quieter now. "I'm trying." Ethan nodded, even though Jason couldn't see him. "That's all that matters." For the first time in 30 years, it felt like they were finally on the same page. And for the first time in a long, long time, Ethan believed in something more than money. Ethan Walker wasn't a man who waited for results. He created them. In his world, progress was measured in numbers, in deals closed, in buildings erected against the skyline. But Jason's recovery wasn't something he could control. It was a battle Jason had to fight alone. Still, Ethan couldn't shake the urge to check in. Every day, he considered calling the rehab facility. Every day, he stopped himself. Jason needed to want this. Ethan couldn't force him into it. Instead, he had his assistant Rachel gather updates discreetly. No special treatment, no easy way out. If Jason was going to rebuild his life, he had to do it from the ground up, just like Ethan had done all those years ago. Then, after 1 month, Jason finally called again. "Ethan." Ethan set down his whiskey glass, his office dimly lit as he sat by the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Jason." A beat of silence. Jason exhaled. "I passed my 1-month check-in." Ethan's fingers tightened around the glass. He leaned forward. "How do you feel?" Jason chuckled, but it was dry, humorless. "Like I got hit by a truck. Every day. My body wants to quit. My brain wants to quit. But—" he trailed off. "But?" Ethan pressed. Jason swallowed. "I don't want to quit." "That's a first." Ethan smirked. Jason scoffed. Yeah, laugh it up, big shot." Ethan leaned back, letting the old nickname sink in. It had been decades since he'd heard Jason say that. But then Jason's voice dropped. "Look, man, I still don't know what I'm supposed to do with my life." Ethan exhaled, thinking, "What did you want to do, sir, before?" Jason was quiet. Then, almost reluctantly, he said, "I used to love fixing things, working with my hands." Ethan's eyebrows lifted slightly. That he could work with. "Okay," Ethan said simply. Jason let out a bitter laugh. "That's all you got, okay?" Ethan smirked. "I'll be in touch." Jason hesitated. Ethan." "Yeah, thanks." And then the line went dead. Ethan set his phone down. It was time to put his plan into motion. 1 week later, Jason Carter walked into a warehouse wearing clean clothes for the first time in years. He still felt like an imposter, like at any moment, someone would realize he didn't belong here. But then he saw Ethan, standing near a group of workers, clipboard in hand, not as a billionaire, but as a man who had built his empire from the ground up. Jason swallowed hard. This wasn't charity. This was an opportunity, and this time he wasn't going to waste it. Jason stood frozen at the entrance of the warehouse, his heart hammering in his chest. It had been years, decades, since he had walked into a place that expected something from him. The last time he had held a real job, the addiction had already been creeping in. He had made promises to show up, to stay clean, to pull himself together. But he had failed, again and again. This time felt different. Maybe because this time, someone actually believed in him. Ethan stood near a workbench, engaged in conversation with a man in a dark blue uniform. He wasn't in one of his tailored suits today, just a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, his watch still the only sign of his wealth. He looked up. Their eyes met. Ethan gave a small nod. Not a grand gesture, not a hero's welcome. Just an acknowledgement. "You made it." Jason swallowed hard and stepped forward. The warehouse smelled of wood, metal, and oil. It was alive with movement. Workers assembling furniture, welding steel, shaping raw materials into something useful. Jason exhaled slowly, trying not to feel out of place. Ethan stepped up beside him. "You ready?" Jason let out a dry laugh. "For what, exactly?" "To start fixing things." Jason glanced around. "What is this place?" Ethan crossed his arms. "One of my construction hubs. We build everything here. Furniture, custom home interiors, fixtures. It's a second chance program. I started it a few years back." Jason raised an eyebrow. "Second chance for who?" Ethan met his gaze. "People like you." Jason stiffened. But Ethan wasn't throwing him a pity party. His expression was calm, matter of fact. This wasn't charity. This was a chance. Jason swallowed. "And you think I can do this?" "I don't think," Ethan said. "I know." Jason shifted on his feet, his stomach twisting with doubt. "And what if I screw it up?" Ethan smirked. "Then you fix it." And Jason, for the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar. Hope. Later that day, Jason stood at a workbench, staring down at a disassembled wooden chair. The other workers had been helpful, showing him the tools, walking him through the basics. But no one hovered. No one treated him like a fragile case. It felt normal. Jason picked up a screwdriver, his fingers wrapping around the handle. Slowly, methodically, he began to piece the chair together. At first, his hands trembled, but as the minutes passed, something clicked. The motion, the rhythm, the familiarity of working with his hands. It was like muscle memory. A part of him he had forgotten was still there. He tightened a screw, wiped sweat from his brow, and let out a slow breath. For the first time in years, he was building something. And for the first time in a long, long time, he wasn't falling apart. Jason Carter had never been a man of patience. His whole life had been a series of quick decisions, rash reactions, and failed attempts to fix what was already broken. But here, in this warehouse, everything demanded patience, the weight of a hammer in his hands, the slow, deliberate turning of a screwdriver, the alignment of wooden pieces before they could be sealed together, and strangely enough, he liked it. It had been weeks since he started working at Ethan's facility, and for the first time in years, his hands weren't shaking. He was eating 3 meals a day, sleeping in a real bed, waking up with a purpose. Of course, it wasn't easy. The withdrawal had been hell, and the cravings still lingered. Some nights he lay awake fighting the demons that whispered that he'd never really change. But each morning, when he walked into the warehouse, picked up his tools, and saw something take shape under his hands, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't a lost cause. One evening, at Ethan's office, Ethan was finishing up reports when there was a knock at his office door. He looked up. Jason, dressed in work boots and a dark flannel. He looked different than before, cleaner, stronger, more put together. Ethan leaned back in his chair. "Didn't expect to see you here." Jason shrugged. "Figured I'd stop by." Ethan smirked. "I don't buy it. What's on your mind?" Jason exhaled, rubbing his jaw. Then, after a long moment, "I don't know who I am without the struggle." Ethan's expression softened. He closed his laptop and leaned forward. He knew exactly what Jason meant. "You don't have to be the struggle," Ethan said. "I just have to keep moving forward." Jason let out a quiet laugh. "That easy, huh?" Ethan shook his head. "No, it's never easy, but it's worth it." Jason nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think I'm starting to believe that." Ethan smirked. "Good. Because you're not just working in that warehouse forever." Jason frowned. "What do you mean?" Ethan leaned back, studying him. "I see potential in you, Jason, more than you see in yourself. I'm offering you something bigger." Jason scoffed. "Bigger than putting chairs together." Ethan's smirk grew. "Yeah, how about running the place?" Jason blinked. "What?" "I need a foreman," Ethan said simply. "Someone who understands this work and understands the people who come through those doors. You've been where they've been. They'll listen to you." Jason stared at him, completely caught off guard. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." Jason swallowed. For years, he had been lost, useless, just another addict no one believed in. And now, Ethan was offering him something real, a role, a purpose, a future. Jason let out a slow breath. "I don't know if I can do this." Ethan's eyes locked onto his. "I do." Silence. Then, finally, Jason nodded. "Because your first shift starts tomorrow." Jason let out a chuckle. "Good. But this time, there was something in it that hadn't been there before. Confidence." Jason woke up before sunrise, something he hadn't done in years. There was no alarm clock, no one forcing him out of bed, just a strange foreign feeling in his chest. Purpose. For so long, his life had been dictated by the next fix, the next mistake, the next regret. But today, he had a reason to get up. He splashed cold water on his face, ran a hand through his short, freshly trimmed hair, and looked at himself in the mirror. He barely recognized the man staring back at him, not just because he looked different, but because he felt different. For the first time in years, he wasn't waking up to survive. He was waking up to build. First day as foreman. When Jason walked into the warehouse, the usual morning hum of machines, hammers, and drills filled the air. Only this time, people were looking at him differently. Some of the workers nodded in acknowledgement. Others gave skeptical glances, as if questioning whether a guy like him deserved this role. Jason understood. He hadn't earned their respect yet, but he would. Ethan was already there, standing near a blueprint table. Jason walked up, trying to play it cool. "So, boss, and what do I do first? Give an inspirational speech, maybe throw out a few orders?" Ethan smirked. "Nope, you do what you've always done." Jason raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" Ethan patted him on the back. "You work." The first half of the day was spent learning. Jason walked the floor, observing how the operation ran. He took notes on which workers were strongest in certain tasks, which ones struggled, which processes slowed down production. But mostly, he listened. He asked questions. He learned people's names. And slowly, he started to see what Ethan had been building here. A place for people who needed a second chance. just like him. Midday break. Jason sat on a bench outside the warehouse, drinking water from a plastic bottle. He was drenched in sweat. Hands sore from handling materials, but it was a good kind of pain. Ethan walked over and sat beside him. "So?" Jason took a deep breath. "It's a lot." Ethan nodded. "Yeah." Jason looked at him. "Why are you doing this, man? You could run 1,000 luxury businesses, live on private jets, never deal with people like us again. So why this?" Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Because I know what it's like to be left behind." Jason was quiet. Ethan continued, his voice lower now. "I was lucky. I got out, but there were a lot of people I left behind who didn't, and I realized, just because I made it out doesn't mean I should forget where I came from." Jason swallowed. He had spent years believing the world didn't care about guys like him. Maybe he had been wrong. End of the day, by the time the shift ended, Jason was exhausted, but it was the best kind of exhaustion he had felt in years. As he wiped his hands on a rag, he noticed one of the younger workers, a guy who couldn't have been older than 21, struggling to fit a wooden frame together. Jason walked over. "Need a hand?" The young guy looked up, hesitant. I got it." Jason nodded, crouching beside him. "Yes, 'cause I did the same thing wrong earlier." The kid hesitated, then finally handed Jason a piece of the frame. Jason showed him how to adjust the angle, tighten the bolts just right. The frame clicked into place. The kid grinned. "Oh, that's way easier." Jason smirked. "Yeah, well, I had a good teacher." From across the room, Ethan watched the exchange, and he knew he had made the right choice. Jason wasn't just fixing furniture, he was fixing himself. Jason never thought he'd feel comfortable in a place of work again, but as the days passed, something strange started to happen. He stopped second-guessing himself every time he gave an order. The workers stopped side-eyeing him like he didn't belong, and most importantly, he stopped feeling like a fraud. One evening, at the warehouse. It was late. Most of the crew had already gone home. Jason was still there, double-checking inventory, making sure everything was locked up properly. He didn't have to stay. No one was watching, but he wanted to. It felt good to care about something again. That's when he heard footsteps behind him. "You planning on living here now?" Jason turned and smirked. "Ethan." Jason shrugged. "Somebody's got to make sure this place doesn't fall apart." Ethan crossed his arms, amused. "How you know 3 months ago you were sleeping on a park bench?" Jason chuckled. "Yeah, well, a lot changes in 3 months." Ethan studied him for a moment. "You proud of yourself yet?" Jason exhaled, looking around the warehouse. "Not yet," he admitted. "But I'm getting there." Ethan nodded. "That's enough." The next morning, Jason was on the floor, directing some of the guys on a new assembly order, when he heard shouting. He turned and immediately recognized the problem. One of the new hires, a guy named Marcus, was arguing with another worker. Jason walked over. "What's going on?" Marcus, a younger guy with twitchy hands and a defensive stance, turned toward Jason. "Nothing, man. Just handling it." The other worker, an older man, Frank, huffed. "Yeah, well, your handling it is slowing down the whole line." Jason narrowed his eyes. He saw it immediately. Marcus was jittery, irritable, on edge. Jason had seen that look before. Hell, he had lived that look before, withdrawal. Frank shook his head. "I told you, Jason, some of these guys don't belong here." Jason turned to Frank, his voice firm. "Go cool off. I'll handle it," Frank muttered under his breath but walked off. Jason then turned back to Marcus. "You using?" Jason asked, straight to the point. Marcus stiffened. "No." Jason raised an eyebrow. Marcus looked away, exhaling sharply. "Not for a few days." Jason nodded. "That's why you feel like hell." Marcus clenched his jaw. I don't know if I can do this, man. My brain won't stop screaming at me to leave, to get high, to..." He stopped himself. His breathing was ragged. The kid was on the edge of either running or breaking down. Jason knew the feeling. He also knew what Ethan had done for him when he was at his lowest. "You want to get out of this?" Jason asked. Marcus swallowed. I don't know how." Jason sighed, then reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He scrolled for a second, then handed it to Marcus. Marcus glanced down. A rehab center's number, Jason's old rehab center. "The first step," Jason said, "is deciding you don't want to live like this anymore." Marcus looked up at him, eyes full of doubt. "You think I can do this?" Jason smirked. "I know you can." Marcus stared at the screen. His fingers trembled over the number. Then, slowly, he nodded. Jason patted him on the shoulder. "Come on, let's get you sorted." From across the warehouse, Ethan had watched the whole thing. Jason hadn't just taken the job, he had stepped up. 3 months ago, Jason was Marcus, lost, angry, ready to quit before he even tried. And now, he was the one pulling others up. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. He had built his empire with money, strategy, and power. But standing there, watching Jason become the kind of man he never thought he could be, this felt like his biggest success yet. Jason sat on the loading dock behind the warehouse, staring at the city skyline. The sun was setting, washing the buildings in shades of orange and gold. For the first time in years, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Footsteps approached behind him. He didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Ethan leaned against the railing beside him, hands in his pockets. "Heard about Marcus," Jason smirked, still looking ahead. "Yeah? You handled that well?" Jason exhaled. "Did what you did for me." Ethan nodded. "That's the point," Jason chuckled. "What? Turning screw-ups into decent human beings?" Ethan smirked. "Something like that." Jason shook his head, still processing everything. "I don't get it, man. Why me? You could have thrown me a check and walked away. I probably would have taken it too." Ethan studied him for a moment. Then he said, "Because I remember the kid you used to be." Jason turned to him, surprised. Ethan's voice was steady. "And I wasn't going to let that kid die in some alley." Jason swallowed hard, looking away. For years, he had convinced himself that no one cared, that he was just another lost cause. But Ethan had proven him wrong. Jason let out a slow breath. "I don't deserve this, man." Ethan scoffed. "Nobody deserves anything, Jason. You take what you're given, and you make something out of it." Jason was quiet for a long time. Then, finally, he nodded. Because for the first time in his life, he actually believed it. 1 month later, Jason stood at the front of the warehouse, clipboard in hand, watching as workers moved in sync. The place ran smoothly now. More than that, it thrived. Workers who once struggled were excelling. Marcus had checked into rehab and was coming back soon. And Jason, he was leading. He caught his reflection in the office window, a man with purpose, with confidence, a man he barely recognized. Then his phone buzzed. A single message from Ethan. "Lunch?" Jason smirked and texted back, "Only if you're paying, big shot." Jason sat across from Ethan at a high-end restaurant, the kind of place he used to walk past without even thinking of entering. Now he belonged here, or at least, he was starting to believe he did. The waiter poured them both coffee. Ethan, as always, barely touched his. Jason, on the other hand, held his cup like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. "You look different," Ethan said, breaking the silence. Jason smirked. "Yeah, clean clothes will do that to a guy." Ethan shook his head. "Not just that." He studied Jason carefully. "You carry yourself differently." Jason leaned back. "Guess that happens when you stop looking over your shoulder every 5 seconds." Ethan nodded, a knowing look in his eyes. Then Jason's smile faded slightly. "You ever think about how things could have gone?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "How do you mean?" Jason exhaled. "If I hadn't seen you that day, if I'd never called, if you'd never given me a shot." Ethan set his coffee down. "Yeah, I do," Jason scoffed. "What do you think would have happened?" Ethan didn't hesitate. "You'd be dead." Jason flinched slightly at the bluntness. He let out a dry laugh. "Yeah, probably." Silence hung between them for a moment. Then Jason looked Ethan dead in the eye. "So why did you do it?" Ethan leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "Because I know what it's like to run from the past. And I know how damn hard it is to turn around and face it." Jason swallowed. Ethan continued. "I left this city, Jason. I built an empire. I thought I'd buried everything that came before it. But seeing you that day," he shook his head, "it reminded me that no matter how much money you make, no matter how far you go, you can't erase where you come from." Jason's jaw clenched. "Yeah, well, some of us didn't get the choice to leave." Ethan's eyes darkened. "I didn't leave you, Jason. I left the life that was going to kill me. Jason nodded slowly, taking that in. For years he had blamed Ethan for abandoning him, but maybe, just maybe, Ethan had done what Jason never could. He had saved himself, and now he had saved Jason too. Jason exhaled. "So what now?" Ethan smirked. "Now you keep building." Jason scoffed. "That simple, huh?" Ethan leaned back, sipping his untouched coffee. "Success isn't complicated, Jason. It's just hard." Jason let out a short chuckle. "Well, lucky for me, I'm used to hard." Ethan smirked. "Then I guess you'll be just fine." Jason nodded. For the first time in years, he believed it. 1 year later, the warehouse was busier than ever. Machines hummed, workers moved in sync, and projects were being completed ahead of schedule. It was no longer just a job site, it was a second-chance factory, and at the center of it all, Jason Carter. Dressed in work boots and a crisp button-down, he stood at the front of the floor, reviewing plans with the team. He wasn't just another worker anymore, he was the foreman. More than that, he was proof that people could change. Ethan walked through the doors, hands in his pockets, watching Jason work. Jason spotted him and smirked. "What, big shot, checking up on me?" Ethan grinned. "Just making sure my investment paid off." Jason chuckled, shaking his head. "So you still think this is about money, don't you?" Ethan's smirk faded slightly. He didn't, not anymore. Jason continued. "You didn't just build a business here, Ethan. You built something bigger than that." He gestured around the warehouse. "These guys, they got something to wake up for now. I got something to wake up for now." Ethan crossed his arms. "And what's that?" Jason looked him dead in the eye. "A future." For the first time in his life, Jason wasn't looking over his shoulder. He wasn't running. He wasn't lost. He was here, he's present, building something real. And for once, he actually believed he deserved it. Ethan clapped Jason on the back. "You did good, Carter." Jason smirked. "Yeah. Well, had a good teacher." Ethan chuckled. "That's debatable." Jason laughed, then looked out over the warehouse floor, watching the workers. Some of them just like he had been, lost, looking for a way out. And now, he was the one leading them out. Jason exhaled, turning back to Ethan. "So what's next?" Ethan smirked. "You tell me," Jason grinned, because for the first time in his life he finally had an answer. What did this story teach us? Second chances matter. You never know when one moment, one person, could change everything. Never forget where you came from. Success isn't just about moving forward. It's about lifting others up along the way. People can change. No matter how lost someone seems, there's always hope. What do you think? Have you ever experienced a life-changing moment like Jason? Let's talk in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another one. And if you want to hear another jaw-dropping real-life transformation, check out this next story. Trust me, you won't believe what happens next.